Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Wednesday, July the 29th. And welcome to our commentary. I'll get to Dr. Fauci in a minute, but before I do that, I want to remind you that I have a post over at the American Thinker this morning talking about the DNC problems. DNC, of course, is the Democrat National Committee. They're having money problems, they're having leadership problems. It's not just the money. I mean, the fact is that some of the senators running and some of the individual politicians running, they're doing just fine with money. It's the DNC, the Democrat National Committee, and they're just having a lot of problems putting together a party message. I think there are lots of divisions, obviously, in the party right now, brought to you by all of these so-called Democrat socialists who are running. The party seems to be, as I mentioned in my post, having a message problem. They can't seem to, on one hand, they know that the message coming from the Democrat socialist is poison. They cannot allow that. But at the same time, they don't seem to have the guts to stand up and say that. So, in many ways, they're victims of their own tolerance. I mean, the fact is that a year and a half ago, they should have stopped this. And you could have had President Obama, President Clinton, President Biden, or Vice President Harris, or Secretary Clinton, any of the high, the heavyweights in the party. They could have gone nationally and said, no, those people don't speak for us, and they're not Democrats. They don't speak for us, and we don't want them here. Obviously, that would have been risky in the sense that it could have meant that they go independent and hurt you in some campaigns. I understand that. But in the long run, it would have been better than what they have right now, which is a party deeply divided and a party that doesn't quite know who they are. I mean, I think deep down inside, most Democrats know that they cannot win. So I think they know who they are in the sense that they know that they cannot be led by these Democrat socialists. But at the same time, they don't want to turn them off because these people are, their votes, their Democrat votes in many elections. So the party needs to decide what they want to do. And right now, they don't have the leadership to do that. They don't really have a presidential candidate who has defined what the party is or can do. So, in many ways, I think that's the big part of the problem here. It's not so much the lack of money. The lack of money is the reflection of the lack of leadership. If they can project a strong image as a party, I think the money will come. But many of the contributors are looking at this party and going, these people are crazy. I mean, these people are insane. They don't even know what kind of party they are. And they want me to put up money. So that's why you see a lot of the money just going directly to campaigns rather than to the party itself. On the other hand, the Republicans, the GOP, and all the PACs and all of that, they're loaded with money. And that money is going to be unleashed probably sometime after Labor Day, when you're going to see the TV ads and you're going to see a lot of that money go out and help Republicans in key states like Michigan, for example. That could be a pickup. In Maine to defend Susan Collins, perhaps even in Georgia, where all the polls are suggesting that they're going to lose, but you never know. Even North Carolina, that could be a little tighter than the polls indicate. So I just think that the money's important. You got to have this money. You got to have the money. But right now, the Democrats are not attracting money because they're projecting such confusion as a party. And as long as they keep projecting that confusion as to what kind of party they are, then nobody's going to be happy and they're not going to put up money. So I guess my advice, number one advice to the Democrat Party is you're going to have to cut your ties with some of these Democrat socialists and just run the risk that you may lose an election over that. But in the long run, you're going to win because your party can get back to being more of a centrist left party, such as, the party they had with Bill Clinton or Michael Dukakis or Al Gore, John Kerry, Jimmy Carter, more of a Walter Mondale kind of party, where yes, they're not conservatives, but they're not crazy left. It's kind of a center party leaning to the left, which is really what's going to put them back in the game as far as elections. Now, they could win the House, even as crazy as things are, as crazy disorganized as they are. They could win the House, but that is going to turn into a major problem for them Because if you think they're having problems now dealing with this group, wait until they're part of a Democrat majority in the House. And then you're going to see chaos like you have not seen before. So the Democrats need to determine who they are, and it would help if you had a presidential candidate telling people who they are and telling people who they're not. That would help. That would help a great deal. So check out my post over at the American Thinker today. Well, Dr. Fauci went before the U.S. Senate. I'm not sure if he's going to go before the Congress tomorrow, but he definitely went before the U.S. Senate, as I'm sure you know by now. He pleaded the Fifth Amendment, I don't know how many times. It seemed like every question he was reading that answer. And first of all, let me just say that he has every legal right to do that. I mean, you can plead the Fifth Amendment when somebody's asking you a question. So legally, he didn't do anything wrong in pleading that. I think, though, that the public deserves a little bit better than what we saw today. And I wish that Dr. Fauci had come out clean a little bit. He doesn't have to admit that he's guilty or anything. He'd simply say, look, I had some wrong information or I made a mistake here and there, and kind of leave it at that. Leave it at that. Because my biggest disappointment with Dr. Fauci is that I remember all that period. I remember that summer of 2020 when you had Republican governors like here in Texas and South Carolina and Florida and Georgia, Ohio, all these Western Republican states. I mean, Republican governors were looking at the so-called science and concluding that you could put the kids back in school or that you can open up businesses. Whereas Democrat governors were looking at the same science with all the experts and concluding that the schools had to remain closed, for example. And I think we did a tremendous harm to the kids by keeping them out of school. So Dr. Fauci would have been the perfect person in 2020 to settle that dispute. He could have said, no, you shouldn't put him back in school. Here are the reasons why. Here's the science. Or he could have said, no, put him back in school. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. But he didn't do that. He didn't do that. And by not doing that, he let COVID become politicized and it become a blue versus red issue, which I think ended up hurting the country even more. Because now all of a sudden COVID was in the presidential elections and COVID got into our politics. And, that doesn't help. It doesn't help. It didn't help 2020 when COVID became so politicized. So what can I tell you? It's a shame he didn't explain things a little bit better. I'm not interested on a personal level. I'm not really interested in putting the guy in jail or anything like that. I mean, it's over. It's history. But there needs to be some explanation. There needs to be some clarification. And he needs to explain to me personally. I would like to know why it is that Governor Abbott in Texas looked at the so-called science and said, yeah, let's put the kids back in school. Let's open up. And then Governor Newsom in California looked at the same science, surrounded by the same scientists, so-called experts, and said, no, the kids are not going back to school. Well, that doesn't make sense. Obviously, somebody was politicizing this. And I think it was the Democrats, but nevertheless, independent of that, you had a lot of kids who were hurt by this. So that's what I would like Fauci to do. Just tell me what went wrong. I don't have to see him go to jail. I mean, that's not really my concern. But I'd like to know what the heck happened. Why is it that two people could look at the same information, two people could look at the science and come to a different conclusion? Because if that's the case, then it really wasn't science. It was something else. So Dr. Fauci, please help us understand what happened. Well, one last note here. I have a post about this coming out tomorrow. July 26 is when they celebrate this big anniversary down in Cuba. July 26, 1953. That would have been 73 years ago today, or a few days ago, I should say. That was the so-called anniversary of the attack on Moncada, which is a big deal. I don't think it was a big deal back then because my parents were there and they tell me that it wasn't that big of a deal back then. It wasn't this big moment in Cuban history back then. But it became a big deal when Castro came to power because he could write that day into, the beginning of his revolution or whatever. But one very interesting detail was missing in this year's celebration, and that was, where was Raul Castro? Nobody saw Raul Castro that day. Normally, he's there, or normally there's somebody there. I mean, ever since they started celebrating this in 1959, either Fidel Castro is there or Raul Castro is there, or generally both. But for the first time, there wasn't a Castro there. And everybody's speculating as to what happened to Raul Castro. Is he ill? Whatever the reason. But I think that, personally, I think it's probably his health. That's my guess, because I know he's having some problems, or have heard that he's having some problems. But I think it would have been nice to bring him out somehow, because his absence probably, raises more questions than if they had just brought him out somehow and sit him out there protected or whatever. But the fact that he wasn't there really raises questions about his health, I'm going to guess. Now, maybe, as I put in my post coming out tomorrow, maybe he was afraid that he was going to be kidnapped by U.S. Special Forces. They were going to jump in and grab him. I mean, that sounds good, but I don't think that would have happened. But I think, frankly, when it's all said and done, it's probably a health issue that he didn't show up to, again, an anniversary of their revolution. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.